Hello, this is an assessment of a Collard and Collard upright piano made, I think, between 1925 and 1930, but there's no serial number anywhere on the piano or any other numbers from tuners, so that's annoying when you're trying to date the piano. And in the trade we do find it a bit annoying when there's no number whatsoever, but of course it doesn't matter in a sense. But we want to try and get the idea of when the piano was made. Collard, quite a prolific make in the UK. You find lots of them around. Started in 1760 apparently, and there's lots of very old grand Collard pianos kept because they look very pretty, but they can be quite difficult to restore. Now the keys are ivory, and there are 85 keys on this piano. Now that's a typical Collard logo, but the company was apparently taken over in 1929 by Chappell's, so this might just be just before that. I don't think it's Chappell. And the pedals are extremely high, which you can see the right hand one's worn a lot, even though it's rounded, because the casters are very big. I don't think they would have been original because the pedals are so high. I think it's about 10 centimetres from the floor. There's plenty of legroom, but more legroom than you need really, so you could certainly would recommend lowering the casters so that it's a bit more comfortable to play. This is an oak case piano, usually associated with school pianos because oak pianos don't have to always be veneered, so there's no veneer for the children to pick off. So you often find oak pianos in schools, lots of oak, for instance, like Danemans, Knights, Wellmars and so on, very often oak, and they're very often in schools too. Now there's a patch on the top here. My colleague polisher could certainly improve the case on this, and it's worth doing while it's with us. And down the side here it's got very damp, and there is some mildew on the action. That's not an issue, except where the action might get a bit tight, so then we'd obviously have to lubricate or change the centre pins. Now the action of the piano is in reasonable condition. Some of the older Collards have actions that tend to break when you work on them. For instance, if you try bending this, you should always try and bend from there because there's a danger for them to break. And on Collards, very often these do break here. If you're in the trade, had experience of that yourself, then you'll know exactly what I mean. I'd like comments underneath, if possible, and other parts as well. In fact, we had a lecture very early on in the Piano Students Association by someone who worked in the Collard factory, and they were very disparaging about the actions. Now this seems to be a reasonably good action. It's a Langer style action. That means it has the extra little bit here, which you have on good quality pianos. Sometimes that's fixed directly there, which is a Schwander style. At least maybe not all Schwander and Langer, but that's what I tend to call them, because the Schwander style hasn't got this bit, and Langer style has this bit here, and it tends to be a bit smoother from my experience. So Schwander can be fine too. The tapes here, the tapes are far too long, and in fact, if you look at the hammers here, the tape should help to bring it back. There's one here, for instance, that's a bit sticky. Now it could be that the centre pin's a bit tight, so you could try and ease it a little bit like that, or take it off and change it or lubricate it. But I don't think that's that much of a problem. The tape though is not holding it, you see. So if you look at the tape on that one, it's far too long, and they're already pulled forwards anyway. You do pull them forwards to adjust them, but we pull that forwards quite a bit more, so it's taking up much earlier. Let's have a look at it now. So taking up much earlier, then that note doesn't stick anymore. So that can be cured by just regulating the tape, but they are extremely long. If they're too long, they might touch the front, but I think these probably don't touch the front, so they could be regulated. So if you look at them, they're all coming off a bit on the late side. So, and these ones are actually shorter, some of the ones here, so they're also coming off late though. So really the tape should pick up. If we try this one, for instance, the tape should pick up pretty soon after the hammer's moves, so the hammer's moving, tape picks up pretty soon afterwards. The function of the tape is mainly to hold the bottom and the top action together. In fact, there's one here that's broken, that one there, and you can see the tape's actually broken, so it's not pulling it back at all. If you take the action out, then you have to be careful not to break anything when you pull this out. So that tape has literally come off, so that needs sticking on again. Interestingly, when I pulled the action forward, I found these extra springs here. You have these on Steinway's upright pianos. It's very common. They can be a bit of a nuisance to put back on here if you take the action apart, but they do function as a kind of return spring. When I tried this piano before making the assessment, I was impressed with the tone, and it is typical Collard, really rich, warm. And a fabulous bass. So renowned really for their excellent basses. It's just the action very often has a problem, but there's another problem on this one. And that's a new string actually, so someone who's put that on has, if you look at it, it's coming out of the pin there. It shouldn't be sticking out here, and that could cause a problem when you turn it and it catches a string next to it. In fact, that one there, I actually set that one. I'll show you in a second, because that one was slightly loose. Now if we listen to the octaves there, and that one is very out, so that tuning pin is loose. Our tuners actually marked it with chalk, which is what you often get when a tuning pin is loose. We do the same, to mark it so that people know that that's a loose tuning pin. And try to turn it with my lever, it is indeed loose. It just moves very easily when you just put a bit of pressure on that way. Now if this was stock piano, if it was one that we were going to sell, we would change all the tuning pins. Although there aren't too many that are very loose here. We obviously want to guarantee the piano for a long time. But they are quite large, these tuning pins, so if you tried changing them, it might be that you get to the maximum and really you have to change the rest plank here, and that's very expensive. We have to do that sometimes on very old Bechstein uprights. We have done many rest planks on them, but setting the pin, let's see if it's going to work. If I try setting that, and basically setting it is holding it hard like that and then hitting it gently with a hammer, well, strong enough so that the pin goes in very slightly. You're not trying to knock the pin all the way in, you're trying to roughen the wood up. So I've set the pin and, well, it's in tune now, just about holding, but it's still a little on the loose side, so we could put a larger pin in there. I think that's what we would do, though they are, as I say, getting quite large already, so there's only probably one or two sizes to go above that, so maybe there is a problem with the rest plank. Obviously that's an expensive job, and we're trying to set the pins as much as possible is the solution, and then changing maybe one or two. As I say, if it's a stock piano we wouldn't do that. For clients, obviously, if they don't want to spend a huge amount on the piano, that's something we can do. These have been replaced strings, so that would be the reason why that one's is out of tune. There's one there out of tune too, so that's another loose pin here. So we're going to have to watch that, and I'll try setting them and see what happens. Well, they have set, but they're not extremely tight. If you've got the piano in a very dry atmosphere, you might find they go even looser. So it's important to keep the piano with good humidity, not putting humidity bars inside, just trying to keep the temperature low in the room, and also trying to keep humidity up. It's good to have a gauge just to see what the humidity is. So it should be 50 is great if you can get that, above 45 if possible, certainly, and not too hot either. I'm looking at the hammers now, because they've got misplaced a bit. If you look at them, some hammers here, there's one here that's not hitting all three strings, just two of them. That's this hammer here. You can see it's just hitting two strings. You can see by the felt there, and if you look here, you can see it's just hitting two strings. So that needs moving over. Now the problem with moving it over is that the softer part of the hammer that's not been hitting the string will come into action, and it will sound very, very different from the ones next to it. So if you do move them over, you've got to reface them first. There's quite a lot of refacing to do on this, so that's something which definitely needs to be done, because a lot of variety of tone. There's some very weak ones, and that's going to be encouraged if it's going to be strengthened if we reface them. Then that will take the weakness away, and it's a good tone piano generally. Something a little bit unusual, which when I took the keys out, I noticed as I pushed them down that one there was making a knocking sound. You can hear it now. So I took the keys out to see what was happening. What I found was that the key was actually hitting the top of this cricket bat and making a noise. These ones were slightly lower, so it's not much in it, but that needs to be lowered a little bit. So I usually lower it using this. You can use an ordinary pin punch, but if you just hit it on the top, it's going to lower it. So that's cured it. So there's a lot of issues on this piano, the major one being loose tuning pins. Obviously that's so important. So I've talked about that a lot, and there's other things, shortening the takes, refacing the hammers definitely. There's a just small thing like replace a pin on the desk here, had a pin through it instead of a proper hinge. That's not really very significant. Fitting new casters, that's what I would certainly want to do that. It was hitting the cricket bats I showed you earlier. So lots of small issues. Wonderful tone collards have, and really enthusiastic whenever I used to tune them. There's lots of them in the UK, so if you've got a collard, and hopefully this has been helpful to you. If it's an older collard, I did mention the action's very fragile, so looking at this one, as I say, there's quite a lot of, surprisingly it was already at 442, the pitch, but there were loose tuning pins. There was the base one that was completely out, and one of the middle ones as well. It's an oak case. That was usually associated with school pianos because you don't have veneer on oak cases, nothing for them to pick off. And yes, I mentioned the casters earlier, sorry. Let's go on and listen to the piano now. So that's a collared and collared upright piano made, I think, between 1925 and 1930. Now, it does have quite a few issues. The main one being the tuning pins. Are they going to hold if we set them, or does it need new tuning pins? And I think a new rest plank. Obviously that's extremely expensive. So if you've got a piano like this with pins that are beginning to get loose, you have to be really careful to have the heating down, ideally, have the humidity up, and then they won't dry out anymore. There's no better way really to keep a piano in a good environment. You can put the hydro seals inside them. It doesn't really works mainly because people forget them after a while. You can put jars in the bottom of the piano. That's the same thing really. Many times we come to a piano that's got jars in the bottom and they're completely dry. I really enjoy the tone of collards. The older ones have very eccentric actions, I would say, very different and fragile too, and they can easily break. So if you've got an older collard, it's more likely you have an older collard if you've got a collard upright piano. Then if you do want to restore it, it's quite a lot of risk in doing so. It takes longer than expected. This is a standard action, I think, more or less. So it's more or less as you have any piano action between 1925 and 1930. Let's say between 25 and 29, because I don't think this is a chapel one. Has a very delicious tone, as collards do. The old grands, there's lots of collard grands. I'm mentioning it now because if you've got a collard, or you may have come across an old collard grand, I really say I don't recommend restoring them unless they're obviously a family heirloom. You want it restored. They can look so beautiful, that's the problem, and that's why there's so many of them still around. Problem in the sense that you're keeping a piano which is really difficult to use as a serious instrument. They can be restored, and if you have restored collard pianos before, then please let me know. It'd be wonderful to hear. So I'm really pleased to be able to assess a collard. It's not one that we've assessed before, I don't think, but there are a large number of them in the UK, especially the older ones. I hope that's helpful. If you do want a piano assessed, please do write to us, info@robertspianos.com.